Hello and good morning, students. Today we are going to start with the next lesson, the third lesson, Exogenetic Processes, Part 1. Now, before we could start, it becomes necessary to understand what is exogenetic processes. Exogenetic means external processes, as even you can find it in the passage number 2. The first line says it is external processes. Now, what is external processes? If we can go back to the second lesson and we can understand that endogenetic forces and endogenetic processes we had studied in the last lesson, in which we had seen the internal forces in the earth's mantle, like the earthquakes and the volcanoes. They create various landforms, right? So those processes with which different landforms like continents, mountains, plateaus and plains are formed, those processes are called endogenetic. But today we are going to see exogenetic processes. The exogenetic processes are the processes which occur on the surface of the Earth's surface. Okay, and these external processes occur because there are certain forces at work. Those forces are solar energy, number one, and number two, gravitational force, and the third is kinetic energy, right? Students, with which we are going to make some notes even while the lecture is on. So, I want you to mark out these areas which I will be marking around the paragraphs so that you can make the notes later after the video ends, right? Okay. Now, as we move on, you can see that the block which displays "do you know," in which what is mentioned that the endogenetic processes, that is the forces which occurs in the Earth's mantle, they create mountains, plateaus, continents, isn't it? These formation of landforms are called as primary and secondary landforms. Now, the exogenetic forces, they also create certain landforms. They are they are U-shaped valleys, dunes, sand dunes, and deltas, isn't it? So these formation of landforms due to the external processes, which is called as tertiary landforms. So you will be noting down this. You will be making the notes later. Now, as we move on, you see, what we can say that the exogenetic processes are largely responsible for the withering of the rocks which are on the surface of the earth, right? Now, as we will switch on, you see, we will come to know that these withering of the rocks takes place due to the three types of processes which goes on the surface of the earth. They which are displayed on the screen of your mobile, you will be noting them. They are the mechanical, then the chemical and the biological processes which goes on, which help in withering the rocks. So we can say that the withering takes place because of the mechanical, then chemical, and the third, biological withering. So for which I expect you to make a mark of this paragraph and you will be noting it down. Now, as we move on, we can see that we have to study further the mechanical withering. Mechanical withering can also be called as the physical withering. The rocks withers. Now you'll be wondering that from last 1 or 2 minutes I'll be continuously repeating the word withering. If you go and take the help of dictionary, you will find withering means becoming weak or becoming fragile. Okay. Now, as we again come back to our first topic, that is mechanical weathering, we can see the explanation which is given regarding exfoliation. Now you will wonder, what is exfoliation? Exfoliation, it is that process, you see, because you will see any rock's external part is exposed to the heat of the sun. Similarly, when the upper layer of the rock gets heated, but at the same time the internal layers of the rock remains cool, and because of the change in the temperatures of the layers of the rock, the the tension is created on the upper layer of the rock, and it withers away, it falls apart. So that process which takes place because of the change of the temperature in the top level layer of the rock and the internal layers of the rock, which is called as exfoliation. So here you are again expected, you see, to make a note, you see. Also, you will be again making it sure that, you see, the mechanical weathering, you see, there are certain factors which are responsible for mechanical weathering. They are temperature, frost, crystal growth, release of pressure, and water. So this should be one of your point. So please note it down. Well, as we move on to the first factor, the temperature, as you know that in the areas of the land where the temperatures are higher, you see, where you see, due to the heat, the minerals, different minerals which are present in the rock particles, they expand indifferently because different minerals have capacity to expand into the different manner, and as a consequence means as a result, you see, the tension is formed into the rocks, which increases and decreases, and due to this, you see, the temperatures, you see, helps in withering of the rocks. You see, this is what we have explanation for temperature. Here I will be ticking it off. I expect you shall be giving your time to read this part. The next comes is frost. Now, what is frost? A frost, you see, generally happens because of the freezing of the water into the cooler times. And especially this happens, you see, as we are all aware, when the temperature falls below 0 degrees Celsius, the water that is accumulated into the crevices and the cracks of the rocks, it gets accumulated there, and the water which is stored into the cracks and the crevices of the rock, it freezes, and as you know, the frozen water is greater in the volume than the liquid form of the water, which leads to the tension, and because of the tension which is created into the cracks of the crevasses, the cracks and the crevasses are developed, it becomes bigger, and the rock shatters. Fine. Again, I expect you to see that this part, again you will give it a time to read. The third factor, which is largely responsible here, is the release in the pressure. Sorry, before that we'll go for the growth of the crystal. Now, initially we'll try to understand what crystal is. Generally, what happens, you see, water is alkaline in its form. This water gets accumulated into the rocks, and which again, you see, water is the universal solvent in which different materials of the rock get solved. And because of this, you see, the capacity of solving of the alkaline water increased. And you see, when the temperature increases, you see, the water is evaporated, it turns into vapor, but it leads the remnant of the minerals turned into the crystals of the alkaline material there, and they get stored into the rocks cracks, and that is why these crystals create tension, and it finally helps into creating a tension, and which helps in withering of the rocks. So again, this area I want, this topic you should read very carefully for your satisfaction. Now, as we move further, you see, the another factor which is responsible for the mechanical withering is release of the pressure. You would have seen that rock is formed of different layers of the various minerals and material present in the rock. As there are several layers with which a rock is formed, the outer layer of the rock, you see, it always put or exert a greater pressure on the inner layers, which latter, you see, when the outer layer gets withered, it releases the tension, and this also leads for the uh, the withering. That is why you see, at the end of the day, you will be again reading into original about the release of the pressure.